Welcome back, everybody. Today we're gonna deep dive into something that I think a lot of people have trouble with, and that's building really great English sentences.
Yeah,
You've sent me a really comprehensive guide to this, and it seems like you're on a mission to really master the English language.
absolutely.
So we're gonna pull out the most useful tips and the most interesting points to try to help you get there.
Fantastic.
And this seems like it's everything from the very basic to the very complex.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, it's like anything, right? It's like building a house. You need a really good foundation.
Okay.
And the guy does a good job of laying out all of those building blocks.
So like with a house, we need a blueprint.
Exactly. And the blueprint for any English sentence is very, very simple. Subject plus verb.
Okay.
Every sentence, no matter how complicated, comes down to that.
The guide actually uses a funny example to illustrate this.
Oh, yeah?
It says, the cat sleeps, hopefully not on our podcast notes.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It's simple but engaging, right?
Yeah.
And it really highlights the core of sentence construction.
Yeah.
You need a subject, the who or the what of the sentence, and then a verb, the acronym,
Okay.
or the state of being.
So that's our foundation, but now we're going to start to get a little more interesting, I would imagine.
Yeah,
The guide mentions 8 parts of speech.
that's right.
Is that where we start adding the rooms to our house?
Exactly. They're like your building materials.
Okay.
So you've got your nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, pronouns, prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections.
Okay.
Each one of those has a specific function in the sentence.
Right.
And they help you convey different types of information and create different effects.
I was looking at the examples the guide gives for each of those.
Yeah.
Some of them are really interesting.
I bet.
Like, did you know there's a word for a group of owls?
I don't actually know.
It's a parliament of owls.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
See, that's a perfect example of choosing the right word to add interest and vividness to your writing.
Yeah.
Think about how much more powerful a parliament of owls is than just a group of owls.
Totally.
Right.
It's like we're using secret code words or something.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
So you're layering in more meaning.
But how do we go beyond labeling these parts of speech and actually using them to build more sophisticated sentences?
Well, that's where the guide's discussion of expanding sentences comes in.
Okay.
So we're talking about objects, complements, and prepositional phrases. These are the tools that let you add detail and depth.
So now we're taking that basic blueprint and we're starting to add walls and windows,
That's it.
a nice porch.
Exactly. And let's just look at objects for a second.
Okay.
That's a noun or pronoun that receives the action of the verb.
Right.
So instead of just the cat sat,
Right.
you could say the cat sat on the mat.
Right.
And that on the mat is a prepositional phrase. It's adding more detail.
The guide actually gives a really funny example.
Uh-oh.
She offered the squirrel a tiny teacup, much to the amusement of the park goers.
Oh my gosh, I can just imagine that happening.
Yeah.
It's such a vivid image, right?
Yeah.
And it's all thanks to that object, a tiny teacup, and that well-placed prepositional phrase at the end, to the amusement of the park goers.
And sentences aren't just about what happens, they're about when things happen. And that's where the whole idea of verb tenses comes in. And that's a big part of this guide.
Huge.
I remember when I was in school, I used to have so much trouble with tenses.
Yeah, it could be tricky.
Like there's so many to keep track of.
There are a lot.
And I noticed the guide spends quite a bit of time talking about the past perfect tense.
Mhm.
Why is that one so important?
Well, it gets misused a lot, but it's essential for communicating the order of events that happened in the past.
Okay.
So let's say you're telling the story. I arrived at the party, but everyone had already left. That had already left is the past perfect. And it lets the listener know that the leaving happened before your arrival.
Right, right.
Without it, it sounds like everyone left at the same time you arrive, and that's confusing.
Right.
So mastering the past perfect really helps you tell stories and communicate information in a clear and logical way.
It's like having a little time machine built into your sentences.
I like that.
But even if we have a good grasp of tenses, sentences can still fall apart if they're not structured correctly. And that's where the guide's discussion of clauses comes in.
Right.
And I've got to tell you, that was always a hard one for me to wrap my head around.
Clauses can be tricky, but they're essential for building well-structured sentences.
Okay.
And the guide does a good job of breaking down the difference between independent and dependent clauses, and that's key to avoiding those pesky fragments and run-on sentences.
Yeah, so how does the guide make that concept easier to grasp? It seems like kind of an abstract idea.
Well, think about it like building a house again.
Okay.
Each clause is like a room.
Okay.
An independent clause that's like a self-contained room, it can stand alone.
Okay.
It has a subject, a verb, and a complete thought.
Okay.
A dependent clause that's more like an addition
Okay.
that needs to be connected to a main room for support.
So you can't just have a bunch of additions without a main room.
Exactly. Otherwise, the whole house will fall apart.
It'll collapse.
Exactly. So that's the difference between independent and dependent clauses.
Right.
And once you get that, you can start constructing sentences that are both grammatically sound and easy to understand.
It's like having that blueprint that not only shows you the rooms, but how they all connect to each other to make a strong structure.
Yeah.
Speaking of structure, the guide then moves on to active versus passive voice, and I remember learning about this in school, but it always just seemed like a really dry grammar rule.
Yeah.
How does the guide approach it in a way that's more useful for somebody who's trying to master English sentences?
Well, it goes beyond just defining active and passive voice, and it really gets into how each one affects the clarity and style of your writing. And that's really important if you want to level up your writing skills.
So it's not about just following a rule, it's about how to use these tools effectively.
Exactly. And active voice is usually clearer and more direct.
Okay.
It puts the subject of the sentence in the driver's seat.
Okay.
So, for example, the author wrote the book that emphasizes the author's agency, and it makes the sentence more dynamic.
But the guide also mentions that passive voice has its place.
It does.
When would we want to use that?
You use it when you want to emphasize the action itself, or when the person or thing doing the action isn't known or isn't important.
Okay.
So, for example, the book was written in 1920. The focus there is on the book and the year.
Right.
It's not so much about the specific author.
So it's really about choosing the right voice to fit the purpose of your sentence.
Exactly. It's about being deliberate with your choices.
This is starting to make so much more sense.
Good. I'm glad.
But we've really only just skimmed the surface of this guide.
We have.
Where do we go from here?
Well, I think we've laid a good foundation. We've looked at some of the basic building blocks.
Yeah.
So in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to delve into the guide's advice on practicing and refining your sentence construction skills. Because it's one thing to understand the concepts,
Right.
but you got to put them into action.
Yeah, we need to get our hands dirty.
We do. We do. Welcome back to our deep dive on crafting those awesome English sentences.
We just finished talking about active and passive voice.
We did.
Which, I love how something that seems like such a dry grammar rule in school is actually so powerful.
Right. It can really change how people read what you write.
Yeah, but knowing about all these tools is just the first step, right?
It is.
The guide keeps saying that practice is really the key to mastering sentence construction.
Practice is everything. Absolutely.
So what kind of practice does the guide recommend for making better sentences? Does it just say write more, or is there something a little more strategic?
It does say write more, but it also gives some really good techniques that'll help you improve your skills and kind of develop a sense for what makes a sentence effective.
So like a training montage for our writing.
Exactly. Exactly.
What are some of those techniques?
Well, one of them that really stands out is active reading.
Active reading, what is that?
It's basically reading with a critical eye, paying attention to how authors structure their sentences and the kinds of choices they make in terms of style.
So it's not just enjoying the story, it's also thinking about how the author is using language.
Exactly. It's like reverse engineering a really well-built house.
Okay.
You're not just admiring the finished product. You're looking at the individual bricks and the beams and the choices the architect made.
I see.
It's like, why does this work so well?
The guide also mentions like breaking down sentences to understand the different parts, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like what's going on in there?
Yep. It encourages you to look at sentences that you really admire, pick them apart, identify the different elements, and figure out why they work well together.
I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, it's good exercise.
It's like dissecting a piece of music to figure out what the composer was doing.
Exactly.
I like that.
You're taking it apart to understand how all the pieces fit together to create the whole.
So are there any other techniques for practicing sentence construction?
Yeah, there are a few. The guide suggests imitating writers that you admire.
Okay.
So you pick an author whose style you really like. You try to replicate their sentence structures and the way they use language.
So it's like learning from the masters.
Exactly, like you're copying the brushstrokes of a painter.
Right.
It's like an apprenticeship. You're studying how experienced writers do it, and then you try to apply that to your own work.
So what about beyond reading and analyzing?
Well, of course, the guide emphasizes actual writing.
Right, we have to write.
You have to write. But it goes beyond just saying write more. It suggests things like keeping a journal or free writing.
So creating a space where you can experiment and play around with different structures and styles without having to worry about an audience.
Exactly. It's about giving yourself permission to make mistakes, to try different things out and not worry about being judged.
Right.
You can just let your creativity flow.
But according with practice, it can be hard to know if you're on the right track. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
So does the guide address the whole idea of getting feedback on your writing?
It does. It really emphasizes how important it is to get feedback from other people, like friends, family, writing groups, maybe even a professional editor.
I think a lot of people are really hesitant to share their writing,
I agree.
especially when they're still learning. It can feel really personal.
It is personal, but remember, feedback is so important for growth.
Okay.
It helps you see your work from a different perspective, and it can really help you identify things that you can improve.
So it's not about being criticized, it's about getting those constructive suggestions.
Exactly. A good critique should focus on the work itself, not on you as a person.
Okay.
It should give specific suggestions for improvement and help you refine your ideas.
And the guide also talks about being open to feedback and actually revising your work, right?
Yes, it stresses that revision is a crucial part of writing.
Okay.
It's not just about fixing typos or grammar mistakes, it's about polishing and refining your writing so that it really shines.
It's like taking that rough draft of a house and making it into a masterpiece.
It is. It's where you really make sure your writing is conveying what you want it to convey in the best way possible.
So are there any specific techniques the guide talks about for revision?
Yeah, it suggests reading your work out loud,
Okay.
which can really help you spot those sentences that are awkward or clunky.
Right.
And it also talks about being ruthless with your editing,
Okay.
cutting out anything that's unnecessary so your writing is clear and punchy.
So we've talked about active reading, sentence analysis, imitation, free writing, getting feedback, and revision.
That's a lot.
It sounds like a very comprehensive approach to mastering sentences.
It is.
Is there anything else the guide highlights in this section?
Yeah, one final thing that I think is really important is the guide's emphasis on finding your own voice.
Okay, so it's not just about learning the rules, it's about using the rules to express yourself authentically.
That's a great way to put it.
I like that.
The guide recognizes that language is powerful, it's creative,
Right.
and it encourages you to experiment, to play with words, and to find what makes your writing unique and exciting.
So it sounds like the guide is really encouraging us to go beyond just grammatically correct sentences and into crafting sentences that are truly our own.
Exactly. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore this whole idea of finding your voice in more detail.
Awesome, I can't wait.
It's about going beyond just the technical stuff and really getting into the creativity and style.
Welcome back to our deep dive, everybody. We are now in the final part of our look at crafting English sentences. We've been through the building blocks, we've looked at practice, revision. It's been quite a journey, but now it's time for the really exciting stuff, like how do we find our own voice?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the technical stuff, but now it's time to breathe some life into your writing.
Yeah.
To give it some style and personality.
The guide refers to language as this living, breathing thing, not just a set of rules.
Right.
So how do we actually tap into that? How do we make it our own?
Think about it this way. If you were building a house, you wouldn't fill it with furniture that didn't match your taste, right?
No, definitely not. I want my personality to be in every room.
Exactly. And writing is the same. You can have perfect grammar, you can have amazing structure, but if it doesn't have your voice, people won't connect with it.
Right.
It'll feel kind of empty.
So how do we go about uncovering that voice? It's kind of an abstract idea.
It is. One way to start is to think about the kind of language that you're naturally drawn to.
Okay.
Like, what books do you enjoy reading? What movies grab your attention? What podcasts really speak to you?
You know, I really enjoy writing that's witty and conversational. I like humor.
Great. That tells you something about your own voice.
Okay.
Embrace that and let it guide you as you write.
So it's not about trying to sound like somebody else. It's about figuring out what really appeals to me and using that.
Exactly. Exactly. Just like with developing your sense of style or fashion, don't be afraid to experiment.
Okay.
Try different voices, different tones and rhythms until you find what feels right for you,
Right, right.
what feels natural and comfortable.
The guide also mentions the importance of just being yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what it means to be authentic in your writing?
I think it's a big part of it. It's about letting your personality shine through your words.
Okay.
Don't try to force yourself to sound formal or academic if that's not you.
Right.
Embrace your quirks. Embrace your sense of humor, your unique way of looking at the world.
So it's like finding the words that really fit.
Yeah, like a perfectly tailored suit.
Yeah.
And just like fashion, writing styles change over time.
Right.
The more you write, the more you'll refine that voice. You'll discover what works.
It's like any skill. The more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you become.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone. Try writing in different genres, different formats.
Okay.
You might surprise yourself, Maybe you'll find out you have a hidden talent for poetry or that you're amazing at writing dialogue.
It's like exploring a city you thought you knew, and you find this hidden little gem that you never knew was there.
I love that analogy. It's all about exploring and discovering, both with language and with yourself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into sentences, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What's the one thing you want them to remember as they continue on their journey?
I'd say, remember this. Mastering English sentences is about so much more than just following rules. It's about finding your voice. It's about expressing yourself authentically and connecting with your readers in a way that feels real.
So we take all this technical stuff, we use it as a foundation, and then we add the creativity, the style, the personality.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to experiment, enjoy the process, and don't worry about making mistakes.
Right.
Sometimes those mistakes are actually where the best stuff comes from.
That's a great note to end on.
Yeah,
Thanks so much for taking us on this deep dive.
it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
I feel like I've not only learned a lot about sentences, but also about myself as a writer.
I think that happens a lot when we really start to explore language. It's a journey of self-discovery as much as anything else.
That's awesome. Until next time, happy writing, everybody.